They thought it would be easy, a lone man, driving down an empty highway, unaware of what awaited him. But what they didn't know was that he wasn't just a man. He was something else entirely. Morgan Kane had spent most of his life in the dark corners of the world, fighting wars that never made the headlines. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a predator honed by violence, trained to survive when the odds were stacked against him. The sky above New Mexico burned with shades of crimson and orange, a brilliant backdrop to the stark emptiness stretching endlessly in every direction. As dusk settled over the desert, the sparse clouds reflected the last rays of light, casting long shadows across the baked earth. The air carried a subtle threat, an unspoken warning that this land was both beautiful and perilous. Kane's Ford Bronco rumbled along the nearly deserted U.S. Route 54, a rugged, battle-worn vehicle that had seen its fair share of action. The faint bullet scars along the side panels and the small dent near the front bumper were reminders of past encounters, each one a testament to a life lived on the razor's edge. Despite his attempts to leave behind the battlefield, his instincts never faded. Tonight, something gnawed at the back of his mind, that sixth sense that had saved his life more times than he could count. His right hand remained steady on the wheel, but his left occasionally brushed against the holstered Sig Sauer P226 at his hip. He wasn't expecting trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him. Then he saw it. A massive 18-wheeler tilted awkwardly on the shoulder of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly. Even from a distance, something felt off. Kane slowed the Bronco, eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a man trained to spot danger. There were no footprints in the dirt near the truck, no sign of a driver who had gone to seek help, no skid marks on the pavement to indicate a mechanical failure. Instead, something else caught the dying sunlight, the faint glint of metal. Shell casings. Kane exhaled slowly, reaching for the Mk-18 Mod 1 rifle resting on the passenger seat. The air was too still. The silence was too deep. A trap. Years of battlefield experience told him that the second he stepped out of his vehicle, the world would explode around him. He had seen it before. He had survived it before. And he would survive it again. Kane barely had time to move before the first shot rang out. A high-pitched crack shattered the silence, followed by the telltale whiz of a bullet slicing through the air. He reacted instantly, ducking behind the Bronco's reinforced door as muzzle flashes flickered from the ridge above. Simultaneously, a pickup truck roared to life behind the abandoned 18-wheeler, its tires screeching as it accelerated toward him. 3 men stood in the truck bed, rifles raised, opening fire without hesitation. The air around Kane erupted with gunfire. Instinct took over. He rolled to the ground, finding cover behind a rocky outcrop just as bullets tore through the Bronco's windshield. A round zipped past his shoulder, close enough that he could feel its heat. Chips of stone flew in all directions as the enemy raked his position with automatic fire. Pinned down, Kane took quick stock of the situation. 3 shooters on the ridge, laying down suppressive fire. The truck on the highway, closing the distance fast, a mounted machine gun trained on his position. Whoever these men were, they had planned well. But they hadn't planned for him. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a smoke grenade. With a flick of his wrist, he lobbed it a few meters ahead. Thick, gray smoke burst forth, billowing into the night and obscuring the gunman's line of sight. Using the momentary cover, Kane pivoted around the rock, raising his P226. He fired twice in quick succession, his shots precise. One of the men in the truck bed collapsed against the tailgate, blood spraying the side panel. Another staggered, dropping his rifle over the edge as he fell out of sight. The third shooter shouted something in Spanish, panic creeping into his voice. Kane didn't give him time to react. He sprinted low toward the pickup, bullets whizzing overhead from the ridge. Reaching the truck, he yanked open the driver's door, finding the seat empty. The driver must have fled or been shot. Better for him. Kane climbed into the truck bed, immediately gripping the mounted M249 machine gun. Ammunition belts trailed from the side. A serious piece of hardware, likely stolen from military stockpiles or purchased on the black market. No time to hesitate. He pivoted the gun toward the hillside and squeezed the trigger. A thunderous volley of 5.56mm rounds erupted from the weapon, the muzzle flashes illuminating the desert twilight. The men on the ridge scrambled, their carefully laid ambush unraveling as Kane unleashed hell upon them. Within seconds, the suppressive fire stopped. Shadows moved erratically as the attackers broke formation, retreating behind rocks and scrambling for safer ground. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Kane didn't waste time. He leaped out of the truck bed, rifle in hand, scanning the ridge through the dissipating smoke. The remaining shooters were scrambling for cover, but he had no intention of letting them escape. He moved swiftly, keeping low, advancing toward a rocky outcrop where one of the gunmen had ducked moments before. His boots crunched against the dry dirt as he closed the distance. A figure darted from behind a boulder, making a break for the far end of the ridge. Kane raised the MK-18 and fired. The shot hit center mass. The man staggered before collapsing into the dust. Another attacker opened fire wildly, spraying rounds in desperation. Kane barely flinched, sidestepping behind a natural rock barrier before popping up and squeezing off 2 controlled shots. The shooter dropped instantly. A faint rustling caught his attention. Kane pivoted just in time to see the last remaining gunman emerge from cover, his hands raised in surrender. "No despairin'," the man stammered, blood trickling down the side of his face. "Please, no." Kane lowered his rifle slightly. "Who sent you?" The man hesitated, eyes darting toward the highway, toward the wreckage of the failed ambush. Kane could see the fear settling in. He wasn't a fighter. He was a hired gun, a disposable asset. Someone had paid him to be here, but he hadn't signed up for a suicide mission. "I don't know his name," the man breathed. "Just a message. Take you alive if possible, dead if necessary." Kane's jaw tightened. "Who do you work for?" "Cartel, Los Diablos," the man admitted quickly. "They want you, man." "Bad." That was all Kane needed to hear. He pulled the trigger. Kane wiped the sweat from his brow, taking a moment to assess the carnage around him. The bodies, the smoldering vehicles, whoever had ordered this attack had underestimated him. That was their first mistake. He climbed back into his Bronco, taking stock of his supplies. The windshield was spiderwebbed with bullet impacts, and the driver's side mirror was blown clean off. The vehicle was still running, but it wouldn't last much longer in a fight. He needed to disappear. Fast. With a final glance at the wreckage, he put the Bronco in gear and peeled off down the highway, kicking up dust in his wake. His mind raced as he drove, piecing together what little he knew. The cartel. Los Diablos. They had been trying to expand their reach north for years, but Kane had never crossed them. So why were they after him? He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start. The Bronco tore down the desolate highway, the roar of the engine masking the thoughts racing through Kane's head. He needed information, and there was only one man who could give it to him: Diego Navarro. Navarro had been a high-level informant for various agencies, operating in the gray space between law enforcement and the cartel world. He had contacts in every corner of the black market and had survived this long by knowing exactly who was gunning for whom. If Los Diablos had put a price on Kane's head, Navarro would know why. The problem was finding him. Kane picked up his burner phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a deep, wary voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" "It's Kane. I need to talk." A pause. Then a low chuckle. "Shit. I heard you were dead." "Not yet. Where are you?" "Not talking on the phone, amigo. But if you're still breathing, you know where to find me." Kane didn't hesitate. He knew exactly where Navarro would be hiding: an old dive bar on the outskirts of El Paso. The kind of place where everyone had a price and the walls had ears. With a hard turn, Kane adjusted his course. He was about to get some answers. The bar was exactly as Kane remembered, dimly lit, reeking of stale beer and sweat, the kind of place where men with bloody knuckles came to drown their sins. A neon sign flickered overhead, buzzing with electric fatigue. Kane stepped inside, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The regulars barely glanced at him, just another ghost passing through. But in the back corner, sitting in the shadows, was Diego Navarro. Navarro was a thick-set man with a face that had seen too many deals go sideways. His eyes flicked up when Kane approached, and a knowing grin spread across his lips. "You're a hard man to kill." Kane pulled out a chair and sat. "Who put the bounty on me?" Navarro exhaled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Straight to business. All right. You pissed off the wrong people, Kane. Los Diablos isn't just some street gang anymore. They've got backing, military-grade weapons, logistics, even government connections. Kane's eyes darkened. Who's pulling the strings? Navarro leaned in. A name's gonna cost you. Kane didn't hesitate. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick roll of cash, and placed it on the table. Navarro chuckled, taking the money with a greedy nod. You're hunting a ghost, my friend. His name is Valdez. Ex-Special Forces. Ran Black Ops for years before going private. He's the one organizing the cartel's new expansion. And he's the one who wants you dead. Kane's fingers curled into a fist. Why? Navarro downed the rest of his whiskey and wiped his mouth. Because you killed his brother. The weight of those words settled in Kane's chest like a lead anchor. He had killed a lot of men. But now, one of them had come back to haunt him. And Valdez wasn't just looking for revenge. He was looking to erase Kane from existence. Kane sat in silence for a moment, digesting Navarro's words. The name Valdez wasn't just another name in his long list of enemies. It was personal. Kane had operated in the shadows for years, eliminating high-value targets. But he never left loose ends. Or so he thought. How much does he know about me? Kane asked, voice low. Navarro leaned back, cracking his knuckles. Enough to hunt you like an animal. He's not just after revenge, Kane. He's making a statement. You're the only one who ever came close to stopping him. Now, he wants to erase your name from history. Kane exhaled slowly, gripping his drink. Where is he now? Navarro smirked. That's another price. Kane pulled his knife from his belt, twirling it between his fingers before slamming it into the wooden table. How about you give me what I need, and I let you walk out of here with both hands? Navarro's smirk wavered, but only for a moment. Then he sighed and nodded. All right. Last I heard, Valdez has been setting up shop south of the border, near Juarez. He's moving something big, military-grade weapons, stolen tech. He's not just expanding. He's preparing for war. Kane narrowed his eyes. War against who? Navarro took another sip of his whiskey. Against everyone. Kane left the bar with a renewed sense of purpose. Juarez. If Valdez was there, Kane needed to move fast. The longer he waited, the more dangerous his enemy would become. He climbed into the Bronco, the engine growling to life. But just as he pulled onto the road, his instincts flared. A black SUV sat idling half a block away, its occupants barely visible behind the tinted windows. Kane didn't need confirmation. Valdez had eyes everywhere. With a casual motion, he reached under his seat, retrieving a suppressed Glock 19. He unbuckled his seatbelt, preparing for the inevitable. Then the SUV's doors burst open. Two men in tactical gear emerged, rifles raised. Kane reacted instantly, kicking open his door and firing in one fluid motion. The first man crumpled before he could squeeze the trigger. The second returned fire, bullets sparking off the Bronco's frame as Kane dove for cover. A third gunman appeared from behind, moving along the side of the street. Kane heard the crunch of gravel behind him, spun, and fired twice. The man went down. Silence fell. Kane exhaled, checking his surroundings. He had just sent Valdez another message. He wasn't going down easy. Now, it was time to take the fight to him. Kane didn't wait. He ditched the Bronco outside of town, torching it in a dry riverbed to cover his tracks. A vehicle change was necessary. Valdez had eyes everywhere, and a lone man in a bullet-riddled Bronco was a dead giveaway. He paid cash for an old Dodge Ram at a rundown auto lot outside El Paso, something nondescript enough to blend in. The less attention he drew, the better. Navarro's words echoed in his head as he drove south. He's preparing for war. Kane had fought enough wars to know what that meant. Valdez wasn't just building an empire, he was consolidating power. That meant corrupt officials, mercenaries, and weapons trafficking at a scale most governments couldn't touch. As Kane neared the border, he pulled off the highway, swapping his gear for something less conspicuous. His tactical vest and MK-18 were stashed under the seat, replaced by a simple pistol holstered at his hip. Juarez wasn't a place you walked into armed like a soldier, not if you wanted to survive. He rolled down the window as he reached the crossing point. The border guard barely glanced at him, uninterested in yet another American heading into Mexico. The real trouble wouldn't start until he got closer to Valdez's operation. And the trouble was exactly what he was looking for. Juarez was a different kind of battlefield. Kane had been in war zones that felt safer than these streets. The city pulsed with unseen dangers, cartel soldiers lurking in shadows, corrupt police watching with indifferent eyes, and desperate people caught in the crossfire. He checked into a no-questions-asked motel, paying cash up front. The room was sparse, smelling of cheap cleaning supplies and cigarette smoke. Perfect. He needed somewhere to lie low while gathering intel. Kane made his first stop at a cantina near the industrial district, the kind of place where cartel lieutenants conducted business out in the open. The bartender, an old man with sharp eyes, glanced at him as he approached. "Tequila?" the bartender asked. Kane nodded. "And information." The bartender scoffed. "That costs extra." Kane slid a folded stack of pesos across the counter. "I'm looking for someone." "Valdez." The bartender stiffened. He eyed Kane more carefully now, glancing around as if gauging who else might be listening. "That's not a name you throw around here, amigo." "I'm not asking for his address," Kane said evenly. "I just need to know who to talk to." The bartender hesitated, then sighed, pocketing the money. "If you want to get close to Valdez, there's only one way, through El Tiburon." Kane narrowed his eyes. "Who's that?" "Felipe Montoya, one of Valdez's top enforcers. He runs the fights downtown. Illegal bouts, underground betting. If you want an introduction, you fight." Kane smirked. "Then I guess I'm fighting." Kane had been in plenty of fights before, but this one was different. It wasn't just about survival. It was his ticket to Valdez. The underground fighting circuit in Juarez wasn't a place for amateurs. It was brutal, unregulated, and often deadly. Fighters weren't just brawlers. They were enforcers, ex-soldiers, and killers looking to prove themselves. And tonight, Kane had to make an impression. The warehouse on the outskirts of the city was packed. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and cheap cigars. A crowd of cartel members, gangsters, and local degenerates surrounded a makeshift ring, shouting and exchanging bets as two men slugged it out in the center. Kane kept his head low as he pushed through the crowd. He was here for one reason: to get the attention of Felipe El Tiburon Montoya. He didn't have to wait long. A heavily tattooed man with a thick scar running down his cheek approached him, sizing him up. "You looking to fight, gringo?" he asked, a grin revealing gold teeth. Kane nodded. "I hear Montoya is looking for new talent." The man chuckled, eyeing Kane's build. "You don't look like much. You sure you can handle yourself?" Kane smirked. "Why don't you put me in the ring and find out?" Kane stripped down to his jeans, stepping into the circle of bodies forming the fight ring. His opponent was a towering man with a shaved head and arms like tree trunks. The crowd roared as the announcer shouted in Spanish, hyping up the match. Kane barely listened. He focused on his breathing, his stance, and his opponent's movements. The fight wasn't about winning. It was about control. The bell rang. The giant lunged, swinging a haymaker meant to take Kane's head off. Kane sidestepped, moving fast, slipping inside his opponent's guard and delivering a sharp elbow to the ribs. The man grunted but barely flinched. A second swing came, faster this time. Kane ducked, driving a fist into the man's liver. The crowd groaned as the giant staggered. Kane followed up with a knee to the chin, sending his opponent sprawling to the dirt floor. Silence. Then, the crowd erupted. Kane wiped blood from his knuckles as the announcer raised his hand in victory. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a man watching from the upper level of the warehouse. A man in a black suit with a silver shark emblem on his lapel. El Tiburon. Kane had his attention. After the fight, Kane was led upstairs, where Montoya sat in a plush leather chair, sipping whiskey. He was shorter than Kane expected, but stocky, with a thick beard and cold, calculating eyes. Montoya gestured to the seat across from him. "You fight well. Not just with power, precision. Military." Kane shrugged. "Something like that." Montoya smirked. "Men like you don't just show up here without a reason. So tell me, gringo, why are you looking for Valdez?" Kane leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "I'm looking for work. Heard he's expanding. I want in." Montoya studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "You might just get your chance. But first, you'll need to prove yourself. We have a job tomorrow night. High risk, high reward. You in?" Kane didn't hesitate. "I'm in." The next night, Kane found himself sitting in the back of a blacked-out SUV, heading toward the outskirts of Juarez. Montoya had given him no details, just a time, a place, and the assurance that if he pulled this off, Valdez would hear his name. Kane kept his expression neutral as he scanned the other men in the vehicle. 3 enforcers sat with him, each heavily armed, their tattoos marking them as longtime cartel soldiers. They spoke in low Spanish, laughing at some inside joke, but Kane knew better than to trust them. If this job was a test, there was a chance it was a setup. The SUV rolled to a stop outside an old industrial site, an abandoned rail yard covered in graffiti and surrounded by rusted shipping containers. A dozen men were already there, preparing for what looked like an arms deal. Montoya climbed out of the lead vehicle, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. "Simple job," he said, turning to Kane. "We're making a trade, money for weapons. You're here to make sure it goes smoothly. No mistakes." Kane nodded but kept his guard up. A second group emerged from the shadows, their leader stepping forward, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a scar down the side of his face. Kane recognized him instantly. Miguel Rojas, a former intelligence officer turned arms dealer, the kind of man who didn't do business unless he had the upper hand. Kane's instincts flared. This wasn't a normal deal. Something was off. The exchange began smoothly. Montoya's men unloaded crates of cash, while Rojas' crew inspected the weapons. But Kane noticed small details that didn't add up. Rojas' men were nervous, their grips tight on their rifles. One of them kept glancing toward a nearby warehouse, shifting from foot to foot. A setup. Kane moved before the first shot was fired. He tackled Montoya just as gunfire erupted, rolling behind cover as bullets raked through the vehicles. Rojas' men had betrayed them. Montoya cursed, drawing his pistol and firing wildly. Kane, moving with precision, put 2 rounds into a shooter on the catwalk above, then grabbed Montoya by the collar. "We need to move." The remaining cartel enforcers scrambled for cover, returning fire. One of Montoya's men went down, blood pooling beneath him. The SUV they arrived in exploded as a grenade launcher fired from the warehouse, sending flames into the night sky. Kane knew they were outgunned. "Fall back," he shouted, dragging Montoya toward the alley behind the rail yard. The surviving men followed, their boots pounding against the pavement as bullets whizzed past them. Rojas' voice echoed over the gunfire. "Montoya, you should have stayed in your lane." Kane didn't hesitate. He spun, aimed, and fired 3 shots in quick succession. Rojas staggered back, clutching his chest before crumpling to the ground. With their leader down, the ambushers hesitated. That was all Kane and Montoya needed. They disappeared into the darkness. They regrouped at a safe house an hour later. The air was thick with tension. Montoya sat at the table, wiping blood from a gash on his forehead, his fury barely contained. "Rojas played us," he muttered. Someone tipped him off. Kane poured himself a glass of tequila, taking a slow sip before answering. It was Valdez. Montoya looked up sharply. "What?" "Think about it. Rojas was small time, and he wouldn't have the balls to betray you unless someone bigger was backing him. Valdez wanted to test you. See if you'd break." Montoya's fists clenched. "That son of a bitch." Kane leaned forward. "Now he thinks you're weak. That means you have 2 options, run or hit back." Montoya's rage twisted into something more dangerous, a cold, calculated fury. He looked at Kane, his lips curling into a smirk. "You just earned your place, gringo. I hope you're ready for war." Kane smirked back. "I was born ready." The next morning, the safe house buzzed with tension. Montoya's men armed themselves, preparing for what was coming. Valdez would not let Rojas' death go unanswered, and the time for subtlety had passed. Kane stood by the window, watching the streets below. "Valdez will come hard and fast. He'll want to make an example of you." Montoya chuckled darkly. "Let him try." Kane shook his head. "We need to move first. Hit his operation before he can regroup. If we wait, we're dead." Montoya considered this, then nodded. "I have a contact in his security team. If Valdez is making moves, we'll know soon." An hour later, the call came in. Valdez was in a private compound outside Juarez, guarded by ex-military contractors and cartel enforcers. It was a fortress. Kane exhaled. "Then we burn it to the ground." The night was thick with anticipation. Montoya's forces, reinforced by mercenaries, moved through the desert toward Valdez's stronghold. Kane rode in the lead vehicle, rifle ready. They reached the compound under the cover of darkness. The perimeter guards were alert, but not expecting a full-scale assault. Cain moved first, silencing a sentry with a blade before signaling the attack. Gunfire erupted, tearing through the night. The compound lit up as floodlights activated, and Valdez's men scrambled to return fire. Cain moved like a ghost through the chaos, eliminating threats with precision. Montoya led the charge through the main gate, cutting down anyone in his path. Explosions rocked the compound as their men set charges, turning the fortress into a battlefield. Then Cain saw him, Valdez, standing on the balcony above, watching the destruction. Their eyes met, and Cain knew this fight wasn't over yet. Cain stormed into the main villa, cutting through Valdez's remaining guards with ruthless efficiency. The hallways smelled of gunpowder and blood, but he pushed forward. He found Valdez in his office, waiting. "You should have stayed dead, Cain," Valdez said, pouring himself a drink. "But here we are." Cain raised his pistol. "You put a price on my head. I'm here to return the favor." Valdez smirked. "Then let's end this like men." He lunged, drawing a blade. Cain barely dodged, feeling the knife graze his arm. He countered with a brutal punch, sending Valdez crashing into the desk. The two men traded blows, their years of training clashing in a brutal dance of survival. Valdez reached for his gun, but Cain was faster. A single shot rang out. Valdez staggered, eyes wide, before slumping to the ground. It was over. The compound burned behind them as Cain and Montoya walked out, the last remnants of Valdez's empire crumbling. Montoya looked at Cain. "So what now?" Cain stared at the flames. "Now I disappear." Montoya chuckled. "You're good at that." Cain turned, walking toward the waiting vehicle. "Try not to become the next Valdez." Montoya didn't respond. As Cain drove into the night, he knew one thing for certain. He had won. But the ghosts of war never stayed buried for long.